This is the voice of freedom. We are not one voice. We are many. We are your voice. But we can only be effective if you use your voice. Your voice. This is the voice of freedom. We will not hide from the truth. We will ask the hard questions until we are sure we have the truth. Welcome to the voice of freedom, where your voice will never be silenced.
Well, howdy, folks. How are you? It seems like we just might have got these issues sorted. Now, some of the issues may or may not have been of my doing. I don't think they were, but have spent the weekend fixing these issues as best we can. And hopefully tonight you are seeing something that is a little bit clearer. Although looking at my YouTube stream at the moment, it's not looking terribly flash. That's interesting. Not as clear as the one we did earlier, and I have changed absolutely nothing. That just means there's a bit more traffic on the modem than we would normally expect, but we know we're all being hammered like that at the moment. I'm not the only one that's copying this sort of beating with our streaming ability. I think just about every one of us is suffering some sort of issues with this in one form or another, to lesser or to greater extents. Depends, I think, on what you're planning on talking about. And if you give them a heads up, they get a little narky about it and can get ahead of you. So you might find that we don't do too much teasing about what we're going to do, and I might start doing the shows at different times so that we get a little more random, and they're going to require somebody sitting on the feed the whole time to make sure they try and jam it. And then, of course, we'll just roll out Starlink and make that a little more difficult. I was going to put Starlink on the roof over the weekend, and turned out there are a few more issues doing that than first encountered, but that plan is still in effect. Let me say hello to a few people. Hello, Michelle. Wonderful to see you in. Scott's in. Pineapple's in. Andrew's in. I am sure somewhere in here, Aussie Sue. Yes, there she is, right at the very top. Hello, darling. I hope you're having a bloody good one. Hello, Carol. And Paul's back. Oh, look, we've got a few people in tonight, and the Galactic Larrikins are in the house. I was going to call you today, boys. I'm very sorry. The day got right away from me. That's what happens when John Wilson turns up. I'll bring you up to date with what John Wilson and I were getting on with a little later on in the show. But just letting you know that there will be some big news coming from John, hopefully Friday. Might be over the weekend, but Friday is where we're aiming at for at the moment. So there'll be some very, very, I think it's very great news for us all, everybody in the freedom movement. There is something great coming for us, and you get to play a role in it. That's probably one of the best parts of it. You get to play a significant role in it. But John and I will tell you more about that as we get in a little bit deeper in the week. Veronique is here. Hello, Veronique. Lovely to see you in. Jono's in too. Also, Redneck Rumbler. Now, there is a name. Love it. All right. Thanks for coming on, folks. It's wonderful to have your company tonight. You might remember the Freedom Truck. You see it in the opener and in the closer. Everything that we do usually has the Freedom Truck in it somewhere. The Freedom Truck was finished only a couple of days before it trekked down to Canberra, and was part of the, celebrations, I'm going to say, that happened in Canberra just over 12 months ago. Now, unfortunately, Paul Offey, who was driving the Freedom Truck, managed to attract the attention of the police, the federal police, the ACT police, and you will have seen the vision streamed live at the time with the Aussie Cossack and the Galactic Larrikins, who were doing the actual streaming. You would have seen what happened. Paul was assaulted, dragged out of the truck, or they attempted to drag out of the truck. They smashed the windows. He bailed out the other side of the vehicle, and eventually half an hour or an hour or so later wound up talking to the police and being, a man about everything. They, of course, promptly arrested him and threw him in jail. That's the kind of pricks that they are. But they are all sorts of pricks in the ACT, particularly when it came to people protesting and having their rights. There was another gentleman who was subjected to an amazing amount of corruption after he attended the Canberra rallies. Now, his name is Bruce Pay, or Pax, if you want to call him that. I'm going to bring him in and let him tell us his story, because it truly is absolutely horrendous. But This one has a very good ending, and I'm hoping that with your help, that Paul will have a very good ending too with the charges that he's currently facing in the Supreme Court in Canberra. They are beaten up to death charges. They have just gone the whole hog. Not unlike what you're about to hear. Good evening, Bruce. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for your service, and it's great to have you as part of the show. You must be happy that you can be in your house with your upturned red ensign. The ulterior or the alternate was 10 years they were trying to lock you up for, wasn't it?
Well, almost all of last year I had that cloud over my head because I got a message from my mate Danny just a couple of weeks ago that said, you do realise it's a year since you were arrested in Canberra. So that all got finalised very late last year, just before Christmas. So, yeah, I was threatened and the AFP made a very serious attempt to get me jailed for 10 or more years for made-up charges. I was set up and I proved it. The court accepted that. And I therefore sympathise a good deal with what Michael and Paul are going through, because the corruption and bastardry that the AFP put me through has been mirrored in the case of Paul as well. There was destruction of evidence. The AFP destroyed evidence of my innocence. They destroyed their body camera vision. That allowed them to make up eyewitness evidence between themselves, which they then tendered in court, 3 of them, very carefully describing in great detail how I had crashed through what my lawyer called a Fort Knox roadblock, ignoring cones and flashing lights and signs, and then deliberately revved my engine, accelerated and crashed into a road worker who was trying to stop the freedom protesters from getting down to the Canberra airport to send a message to our politicians.
Yep.
Now, just briefly, what actually happened was this was a day or two before the big protests in Canberra. We heard the pollies were flying in and we're just at a loose end at Camp Epic, and we thought, why don't we just go down to the airport and hold our flags upside down so as the politicians can see it as they're flying in. So we drove down in the direction of the airport, and as we got to the airport, traffic got heavier and heavier and heavier and eventually got down to walking pace. So we were proceeding at walking pace down a slip road into the airport premises with the intention of protesting. And the police and the traffic people were just beginning to set up a roadblock to stop us dirty protesters from being seen getting there. And when I say just getting started, they had done nothing. The only visible obstruction in the road was an anonymous vehicle that was parked half in my lane and half in the next lane. And traffic was filtering around that. There was no signage, no beacons, no lights, nothing. So I just started filtering around that at walking pace, same as the rest of the traffic, at which a very large road worker leapt out from behind his vehicle into the path of my vehicle, causing me to stop, which I could easily do because I was doing walking pace. And when I stopped, he then carried forward for a few paces up to my vehicle, raised both hands up into the air, smashed them down on the bonnet of my Land Cruiser, hard enough to leave a dent in it, by the way. Right. And then he stayed there hanging onto the rebar and yelling and waving his arms at me. And this was all a complete surprise to me because I was just, filtering around what I thought was a plumber's truck that was part way across the roadway at walking pace. Now, in an amazing coincidence, not 50 metres away was a police car with 3 AFP officers in it. And these weren't ordinary AFP officers. These were officers who are assigned to the COVID Management Task Force. Because if you don't know, the police were running a special operation in Canberra over the period of the protests. You might remember it was a big event. It was just before the federal election. The government was in trouble. They were pretty keen that there not be any problems, shall we say. So they drafted in officers from Sydney and elsewhere around the country to take part in this special policing operation to keep the protesters in check. And like I say, by some miracle, they just happened to be sitting not 50 yards away watching as this road worker assaulted my vehicle. So they just arrived within seconds upon the scene. And then started alleging that, I deliberately rammed him as described. The only problem was that the first policeman who came up to my window, not 30 seconds into this, admitted twice that I didn't strike the road worker. In fact, he said words to the effect of, hey, you nearly hit that guy, you nearly ran him over. Not you did hit him, you deliberately revved your engine. So for me, it was just a minor nothing traffic incident to start with. But they then spent half an hour walking around the scene, talking on phones and doing background checks. And they admitted that's what they were doing. They were doing background checks. And then someone, obviously further up the food chain, worked out that I was worth making an example of, because you might not be aware, but I'd been made an example of in South Australia a few months before, when the State Attorney General, Josh Teague, who was my state MP, didn't like me asking him questions about COVID management. As a experienced trauma doctor, he didn't like me questioning the government's response to that. So he sent the police round to my house on a weekend to give me a home visit, to tell me to pull my head in or things would happen that I did not want. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, well, that's right. So obviously when they did their half hour's worth of background checks, the first thing they did is contact South Australia, because, you know, South Australian vehicles, South Australian plated. And they got told that, yeah, this guy's got a bit of history. He might be worth making an example of in the protest movement. So the police changed their tune from an initial comment, which I filmed, of them saying, hey, you nearly hit that guy, you nearly ran him over, which I denied, by the way. Half an hour later, they arrested me for dangerous, reckless and furious driving and threw me in the slammer. Obviously based on, you know, the intel that they'd received and the instructions they'd received that, you know, this guy's worth making an example of.
Yeah.
So I then spent 6 or 8 hours in the Canberra lockup, wondering what the hell had happened. And it all became clear about 6 o'clock that night, because I then got marched down to the front desk, where the sergeant pushed a piece of paper across the desk and said, there's your bail, sign that and you're out of here. And I read the bail agreement, and it said that I agreed to leave Canberra and cease protesting. This for a traffic offence, get it?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's pretty obvious what it was all about.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I said to the sergeant, I'm not signing that. I'm here to protest. Leaving Canberra and ceasing protesting doesn't work for me. And he looked genuinely shocked. I'm guessing there's not a lot of people who refuse bail.
Yeah, yeah.
Anyway, I refused bail because I said, no, I'm here to protest, and that's nothing to do with a so-called traffic offence. And I'm going to protest from within jail, if not without. I'm not going back home. And so I went directly to jail, and I spent almost a week in solitary at the Canberra jail, locked in a room about 2 metres by 4, not allowed to go out in the yard, with the door not opening for an entire week. And that was when the bastardry really started, because I was cut off from the outside world. I was given no contact with anybody. You know, they give you a nice piece of paper that tells you what your rights and responsibilities as a prisoner are. And it's got all this stuff on it that say, you know, you can contact your lawyer at any time and things like that. And so I said, I need a lawyer. I want to speak to a lawyer. And they said, well, give us the phone number of your lawyer. And I said, well, how am I going to do that? And they said, well, you know, that's your problem, basically. And I thought, well, maybe I'll ring one of my relatives and get them to find me a lawyer. But the problem was they wouldn't give me a phone call for a week, despite the fact that I'm told I can have phone calls. And in fact, I had multiple people ringing the jail every day asking what the hell's going on, you know, relatives of mine. And there were protests outside the law courts in Canberra every day while I was in jail. And every day they said to me, no messages, nobody's rung in, you know, nobody's on your list. So they completely ignored my so-called rights, cut me off from the outside world, gave me no access to legal representation. And it was only because it was arranged anyway externally for me that I got a proper lawyer representing me at a proper bail hearing a week later, and I finally got out. And even at that point, I was on bail for the best part of a year before my trial came up in Canberra. And during that period, they just kept stacking on charges. You know, the first copper who came up to my window went, you know, you nearly hit that guy. In the end, they charged me with 4 serious criminal offences and tried to put me in jail for 10 years. In fact, the worst charge I received, the top one of the lot, was assault occasioning actual bodily harm, aggravated, where the aggravating factor was the use of a weapon, which was the motor vehicle.
Yeah.
And they didn't back off from that. I went all the way to court. I spent $25,000 on a 3-day trial. I presented my video evidence of the police admitting that I didn't strike the man. So straight away, all the charges go away. And despite that, they argued continuously throughout that I was a very dangerous person who deliberately rammed this road worker at a roadblock. And they seriously tried to put me in jail for 10 years. Thank you very much, AFP. And as an aside, we spoke a bit earlier, I was an emergency services worker for decades. I was a volunteer paramedic. I was an ambulance doctor. I was a volunteer fireman, 20, 30 years in each of those roles. And I was a military officer. I used to regard the police as comrades in arms in the emergency services sector. And yet when it came down to it, these bastards set me up, lied, destroyed evidence and tried to get me jail for 10 years. And message to you, AFP, and any other policeman who's been party to this sort of bastardry in the last year, I hope you realise it's not over. You have made your career more difficult and more dangerous forever. People like me are never going to help you in future. We're going to watch you burn.
Yep. I'm very interested because you had 3 police officers get on the stand and tell absolute lies that you disproved with video evidence. And yet there are no consequences for them, I believe.
There are no consequences. The closest it got to a consequence was the judge labelling the disconnect between my clear video evidence and the tight constructed stories of the 3 professional witnesses, the 3 sworn officers. They all had the same story. The only problem is my video proved it couldn't be right. The best the judge could do is say that she thought that was curious.
Curious.
No apologies, nothing. I still haven't, allegedly I get paid, some of my costs. Months have gone by, I've seen no costs. I had a senior AFP officer slander me on television, saying that a protester was arrested for striking and injuring a road worker. Well, I've been to court and proven that didn't happen. Nobody's come out from the AFP and said, sorry, we got it wrong. Everyone knows it's me.
Have you considered suing them personally in their private capacity?
Do you think I trust the system enough to even bother with that?
I guess that's the other side of the argument, isn't it? And you don't even have to have, you might have some faith in the system, but you can have zero faith in the person sitting on the bench in most cases, unfortunately. So
it's unknown. It's unknown. I mean, in my case, the judge was okay, but I don't trust him. I don't trust anything anymore.
Oh, look, I think there are some good ones. And in fact, over the weekend, I saw 42 minutes worth. I'm not sure. It's in the description either on the YouTube link or on the Rumble link, folks. If you want to have a look at a Twitter thing that I watched over the weekend, it's 42 minutes long, but it is a 42-minute in-depth expose of the corruption in Arizona, particularly Maricopa County. And the corruption is in every level of government and judiciary. She names judges, and a number of judges in different levels of the court system all the way through Arizona in different towns and cities. She names police stations in counties that have private police groups inside them. And of course, she's also named and shown the proof of the governor of Arizona being involved in this corruption since I think as far back as 2007 when she was involved in immigration, and that's why the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico found her a worthy recipient of their money, because she could make it easier for them to get people, drugs and whatever else smuggled across that Mexican border.
Carl, I think it's across the board, Carl. It's across the board. You look at every single formally trustworthy institution in the West is now questionable. You can't trust the medical profession. You can't trust the police, the media, the unions, nothing. Everything is broken.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know how anybody, certainly nobody who's awake, has any faith. They're probably more scared of getting sick and requiring a doctor, even just to go in and get a stitch because you cut yourself, while you're chopping up the carrots for dinner. I know I wouldn't. I would go and get some super glue and glue myself back together before I went into a bloody hospital for any reason.
We used
I
to
would
do
have
that, by the way. We used to
Yeah,
use
yeah.
super glue on wounds. That's a reasonable thing.
Absolutely, it is very reasonable thing, and I'm not a bleeder either, so that's good. I can sort of pinch off blood and it stops bleeding pretty quickly. Okay, probably different thing with an artery, but the small ones I might be able to get away with. I'm so glad that your case went in the direction that it did for you, Bruce. It was an important case, not just for you, but for all the freedom fighters who've been charged with anything. And sadly, and I'm as guilty as anybody else about this, we haven't raised you up and been telling the story of the success that you've had and how you had that success. It's key to understand that you film everything you do. If you're in the car, you've got a dash cam, you've got a phone going, you've got something going, that a GoPro somewhere, so that you are always protecting yourself. And I think
that was critical in keeping me out of jail for 10 years. Absolutely critical. And on that topic, don't trust the police vision either, because the police were filming me as I was filming them. And I checked that with them. I said, "Are you filming me on your body cam?" They said, "Yes." And I said, "Good. I want you to keep that vision, because I'm going to call for that in my defense." And they said, "Sure thing." And funny thing, when it got to court and I did call for that film, you know what the police said? Nope.
Oh, looks like Bruce is cutting out a little bit there. Or maybe it's me looking at my other feed and seeing if it's still sort of working. No, Bruce, are you... I tell you what, Bruce has jammed up just
little
for a second.
drop off there. Just got back on, I think.
There you go. Now you're back. There you go. I might take this opportunity to bring Michael in, because we're at the point now where pretty much the charges are very similar, and they're between the two Offie brothers, they're at the point now of the court case is probably pretty much inevitable. So let's bring Michael in. Evening, Michael. Thanks for joining us tonight. How are you and Paul going? Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Are we on there now? That should be better.
There you go. Now
Apologies
I can hear you.
for that.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
How's things with you and Paul?
I'm probably going better than him, I guess. I'm not facing all these dramas that he is. I'm just dealing with it in the back end and trying to help him get through it. So
can you just explain? Well, first of all, tell us what happened. Tell us what he's been charged with and where we're currently at.
Well, I guess essentially he was down there like Bruce was, and quite a few 100,000 other people from all reliable reports, contrary to some of the unreliable reports from the more official sides. And they he drove down with a convoy from the Gold Coast. Well, as it passed through the Gold Coast, it had actually come from North Queensland, and he actually took down about 5 bootloads of donated food items for Camp Epic that people from the Gold Coast had madly donated the day or two before. He had a fairly big truck that enabled him to be able to do that, so that was half the reason why he went down. Because we'd heard quite a few people up here on the convoy group were trying to donate food, but nobody had ways of getting it there. So that was a big part of the reason why he went down. And actually because he's on a disability pension, his fuel was actually paid for by a lady further down New South Wales, whose business had been pretty heavily affected, and she couldn't get to it because she was trying to keep her business open, and she offered to pay the fuel for his travel, which was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Anyway, he got down there on the actually late Thursday night, but really was down there for the Friday before the big rally the next day. Ended up spending after unloading all the food that he'd supplied and helped unload another truck of food with his group. He spent the rest of the day in the food tent areas, sorting and
Yeah, the
unloading
camp kitchen thing. Yeah.
and organising food for the camp kitchen. And then by the time it came to later in the afternoon, early evening, they realised that they didn't have enough bread to be able to feed everyone at the sausage sizzle. So he managed to go out and get a whole heap of bread, which he didn't want to move his truck because there was too much traffic congestion getting in and out of the camp. So he went out to the road and managed to hitchhike with an older Hungarian bloke, retired guy, who obviously from where he'd come from had a fair clue of what freedom was meant to mean and what can happen when you don't have it. And he kindly gave him a hitchhike lift into the nearest supermarket. And they loaded up a shopping trolley of food. They got to the checkout. Paul went to pay for it, and a lady at the checkout, a local, she said, "Oh, are you guys over at the Camp Epic with the whole Freedom Rally?" Obviously, realising you don't usually carry around a shopping trolley packed full of bread.
Full of bread. Yeah.
and she said, pulled out a credit card and paid for the bread, for the whole trolley load of bread. She said, I'm working tomorrow. I can't get to the whole thing, but I'm local and I'd like to help out. So Paul found it a pretty amazing experience with the amount of generosity and support that was going around. And, on every overpass all the way down from Queensland to Canberra, there were people hanging flags over the overpasses and waiting for the convoy to go through. So there was a lot of support Australia-wide, which I don't think everybody in the country realises just how much support there really was for it and how widespread the support was. But, he ended up finishing that day. Unfortunately, missed the night's meeting as to what was being done the next day, so he missed all the info on that. So early hours of the morning, one of the other people in the that was driving one of the I think it was a few people that were organising the other trucks that were driving in in the procession or whatever. They asked him to join in, so he was instructed to follow a couple of trucks that were heading up to the second stage, not the main stage, but the second stage, which incidentally was up near New Parliament House, where the main stage was down at the old Parliament House. So he's ended up sort of falling into line with those trucks and drove through with the rally all the way up towards the Parliament area.
Yep.
And I guess what confused him the most was when they were getting to that area. He thought they'd been told that they were supposed to continue up towards New Parliament and swing around into the top of the area for the top stage. That's what he understood he'd been told before he left. And when they were
it's important to understand that Paul has not one but 3 brain injuries.
Never been to Canberra. Never been to Canberra in his adult life.
Yeah. So when he's given an instruction, Paul isn't the kind of bloke who goes against instructions unless it's going hard against his grain. So he would be.
Unfortunately, the problem is he tends to listen too much to the instruction and tries to follow it to what he believed he was told. And that's where he's then come unstuck later, because he's been going, well, hang on, I'm supposed to be going here. They started getting turned off at the bottom, and they actually, the way they were getting turned off, it looked like the trucks in front got turned around and doubled back, and that really threw him. At that time, a popular YouTuber has come along in the freedom movement and interrupted his proceeding, where he was trying to follow the other trucks. By the time he's finished being sort of interviewing his passenger and then him, the other trucks have gone from sight, and he had no direct contact with them. Had tried with the method they had, but couldn't get a hold of them.
Yeah,
and he's then the YouTuber's gone up to a police officer at that sort of intersection and obviously had conversation with him. Unfortunately, didn't get relayed in in any detail to Paul.
No.
Which basically was to the effect that they had to go the way that he was directing them. And then he's sort of been convinced to proceed up to, or asked whether he wanted to proceed up to sort of towards Parliament, because which
is where
sort
Paul
of
thought he was meant to be.
fell in line with what he thought he was supposed to be doing anyway, and that's why he sort of
Yeah.
said, well, if you want to come with me. And at that time, he only knew of this other personality to a very limited nature, and had heard that he was standing for Parliament. So he said his first mindset was, oh, okay, if I stick with him and he's got TV, camera crew running and everything, I'll be, should be pretty right, because he's not going to do anything that's going to cause any dramas because he's standing for Parliament. Well, that didn't quite go that way, obviously, and further up, closer to New Parliament, was where the difficulties arose, because they obviously wanted him to go a certain direction, and he thought he was still following the other person, and sort of got into hot water there. But I mean, ultimately, the silly thing is
okay.
if,
let's just skip forward. Let's skip forward to the charges and where we're at right now, because we know that they the police wanted him to go one way, but they were giving those instructions to somebody else. That somebody else was relaying not exactly the same words or the same instructions, in fact, to Paul. And then the police get involved. They stood in front of the truck, tried to block it, and eventually smashed the windows. Unsafely tried to bring the truck to a halt. Paul had actually put the truck in park, put the handbrake on. Police were reaching through the window and undid the handbrake. These are people, obviously, who don't know heavy vehicles, don't know their operation, and this police officer had in effect turned the handbrake off, and the truck could have rolled over anybody. Paul was only ever travelling at first gear crawling pace, not even walking pace. You can see very clearly in the video that the crowds are walking faster than the truck is moving. So this is very similar, Bruce, to the evidence that you were able to provide. Now, thankfully, the truck had a couple of GoPros inside it. We obviously have all the footage. Yeah, we have all the footage recorded externally by the Galactic Larrikins and others. And you've also been able to get, under Freedom of Information, access to the body cameras of the police. Is that right?
They've used that as their evidence, so they have to hand that over, obviously, as part of their evidence brief. So, yeah.
Have you had the opportunity to compare the vision versus the statements that have been levelled against Paul and the charges?
Obviously, some of the statements don't really stack up to how you would think that they should be based on what you would see happened, but that doesn't seem to be anything unusual as far as Bruce's situation either.
I know I was in Canberra. I was with Paul at the mediation at the Supreme Court. Since then, we came out of that day with a couple of options, and Paul was able to go away and have a bit of a think about what he wanted to do going forward. Do you want to explain that situation and what Paul's decided to do yet, if anything?
Well, I don't think he's fully decided, but the options I don't think ended up being all that great. We're still waiting for complete clarification on all that. But yeah, unfortunately, I think that the ultimate situation is going to be that it will potentially have to go to court. And
yes,
you'd probably be more already going in that direction, definitely, but funding is the challenge. Because he's been forced to take legal aid representation. They wouldn't allow him to continue representing himself, which he was doing with some assistance of someone retired from the legal fraternity. And the legal aid obviously don't really look too favourably towards taking on a full-blown court matter in the actual courts. So, it's likely to be an expensive process, but he's a pensioner that's had all his assets taken away from him
his future. This was his career going forward.
Well, it just put every single cent he had, and down to having sold his TV about 4 weeks prior to going down there to pay for the last of the fitting out of the truck to get it set up for higher class chauffeuring work. He just had his chauffeuring license approved. His intention was to go down there for that weekend. Was actually fairly seriously beforehand wanting to make sure that he didn't get caught up in anything, and was then going to see our mother, who wasn't too well. As it turned out, he wasn't then able, with all this going on, wasn't able to ever get there until literally a couple of days before she passed away. And I guess the only nice thing there was that she came good long enough for about an hour for him to actually have a conversation with her.
Oh, wow.
And Michael, I know
hard.
In my case, I had, every charge that I was levelled at me had as a corollary loss of license. I got a heavy truck license too.
Yeah.
And so this is an extra problem for Paul. Not only is he, had huge cloud over his head and no truck, he can't even bargain this down to one minor traffic offence because his truck license goes away.
Yeah, pretty much.
So they're putting he has to fight.
He doesn't really believe that there was no ill intent right from the beginning. He never attempted to do anything untoward towards anybody.
Nobody was hurt.
No, there was no injury. There was no damage to property. There was nothing that actually warranted what occurred. If anyone had actually had the wherewith to ask him where he was trying to go, they would have got an answer of, I'm trying to get to the stage where I've been sent to go, and which so happened to be about 80 metres further along from where he was stopped. And he would have had an opportunity, or they would have had an opportunity rather, to establish, here's the right way to get there. We'll help you get through the crowd and get around there. It was essentially a big rally, protest, whatever you want to call it. It was generally entirely peaceful. There was no, there was no incidents from anybody there. All they needed to do was assist in the general proceedings of the day, and there would have been nothing to go down.
So after they've charged Paul, they locked him up. I think how long did he spend inside?
A bit over 48 hours. Of course, in true fashion, they refused him a phone call, refused him legal assistance.
But when the bail document came, it too had the "you will sign this and you will leave Canberra immediately and not protest anymore" as one of the conditions, as Bruce was telling us was on his earlier.
Well, that was the only condition. It was clearly an effort to break up the rally going on down there.
Now, they charged him initially. I think there were 4 charges, but a few weeks later, those charges were withdrawn and a whole pile of new ones were levelled against him. Is that right?
Well, they weren't withdrawn. They don't withdraw charges. Come on.
They add.
They add by multiplication, not addition. They essentially started off initially, on the first day when they arrested him with 3 traffic offences, and then the morning of I think it was possibly the morning of the bail hearing, they added an additional one and upped one of the others.
Put the aggravated in front of it.
Yeah, put aggravated in front of it. That's correct.
Yep.
And that, from what I can tell, is nothing to do with truth of what occurred. No. It's purely about what can we use to achieve a certain end result. And the end result they were trying to achieve then was to be able to impound the truck. That's why they added that there, because that gave them the ability to do that. Then, of course, a few weeks later, we'll see the truck was actually, bit of backstory, the truck is actually cast in a movie production up on the Gold Coast. A small budget, mostly small family public funded movie, kids movie nonetheless. And it was already half the scenes for the truck were already shot in it, and it was not as though it was just a minor extra for the production. It was actually their lead actor's vehicle in the movie. So they've struggled to be able to complete the movie, and it's now a year later, and they still can't finish, and hemorrhaging money like you wouldn't believe. Anyway, as a result of all that being the case, even aside from the fact that it was his method of transport, method of income, and he was at the time living out of the vehicle, his lawyers attempted to put in an application for the release of the truck from impound, which is what it had been notified as in the documentation, that it was a 3-month impound, and there's allowances under the impound laws for it to be released, particularly if it's affecting innocent third parties in a financial capacity. So that application was put in, and once the courts approved a hearing for that matter, the AFP contacted the lawyers and said, we're actually not impounding it. We've got an application going in next week for the confiscation of it.
Yeah.
And the lawyers were gobsmacked and said, how can you do it off of these charges? It's ridiculous. It's absurd. They tried to justify that, and then the lawyers put in an application to the court to have those charges, or to have the whole thing basically an abusive, trying to say that it was an abusive process, the way they were handling it. So their answer to that was magically to re-look at the evidence and find additional charges they could lay, which have fairly significant penalties, which then escalates it into the Supreme Court, escalates it into, all combined, probably well over 20 years of time if it was found guilty on those charges. And they've done that 2 months after the event. They've magically found that he did more things wrong.
Same in my case, Michael, exactly the same. They just progressively added charges just to ratchet up the pressure as things go on. And I had a colleague or an acquaintance of mine who was an ex-policeman, and he said that's a standard tactic in the police court. That's called serving you a burger with the lot.
Yeah,
it's just
right.
An act of bastardry. If you want to fight the system, they'll just bastardize you by doing that.
Yeah. And like any good Macca's burger, it doesn't even taste good.
No, and it really gives you the shits. All right. I know that you guys have some money. I know that you have some money to put towards a lawyer. You've already outlaid some tens of thousands of dollars towards legal fees and advice from some areas. And now it seems quite evident, particularly after the experience with the Supreme Court and mediation, it's very clear that the COCA laws under which the ACT now trying to chase this vehicle are being used corruptly. The COCA laws, in particularly the ACT, are worded in such a fashion that even if you win, there's no guarantee you're going to get your shit back, because the COCA laws are the proceeds of crime.
It's actually a civil act as opposed to a criminal act, so it's completely separate and unrelated to any criminal finding. So you can be found completely not guilty, and it's just basically a civil inconvenience applied to you to sink you financially on a completely separate angle, and there is no need, there is not the requirement for proof of evidence or or guilt as there is in a criminal matter. So it's basically, if there's, the way it's worded is if there's a suspicion or a belief of. Well, that doesn't hold true in any other factor of criminal
No.
law or any other law really. So it's
No.
it's pretty much a farce. But it's used to be inconvenient.
The nice thing about civil law is that you can have a go at the people who are pushing this civilly as well, but that's not the case at the moment. What we need to look at is a barrister, really, isn't it? Because we need to get somebody in the system who will actually fight for you. Bruce was saying earlier, he had legal aid initially too, and it became very clear that he was going to jail if he was going to be using legal aid. I think that's pretty much the case with what you've discovered. They tried
to sugarcoat their opinion on things, but until the hammer falls, you wouldn't know what you're really going to get out of it.
Yeah. So you have had some dealings with some barristers, including the one I believe that helped Bruce. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think ultimately they're, attempting to do the best they can with the circumstances. They've, in his case, they've obviously worked pretty well, and they were, I think they were caught a little bit off guard with Paul's original situation, because that was right early in the piece, and I think it proves fairly quickly how corrupt the process was, or not so much corrupt, but how politicized it was, and that it is not about justice or what is right or wrong. That's completely beside the point. It's about a motive that they have, and they're hell bent on achieving it. And he's, I suppose, expendable in their mind. They also probably quite comfortable with the fact that he's a disability pensioner after multiple previous unfortunate injuries, which I'll add were not his fault. He was just an unfortunate victim of them. We'd just come clear of 10 years of legal hell trying to get somewhere with that, which essentially left him pretty much empty-handed, not even enough to cover his medical costs that he'd spent to that point in time, let alone anything for his future or for the fact that he couldn't work for the rest of his future. That's why he'd, when this opportunity came with the vehicle, he was to acquire that. He was setting it up because it would have allowed him to work within his health capabilities, or health capacity, which is fairly limited. He would have been able to actually earn enough money to actually stay afloat and possibly even afford rent, which he hasn't been able to afford since well before this incident. And for the last year or so, he's either been crashing with us or couch surfing or in a tent, which he's in at the moment somewhere in someone's backyard. Right. So,
Yeah.
It makes it a bit tough.
Yeah, it's just a shitful story, and I was there to see how they treated him at the Supreme Court, and having had a bit of a look at the brief, and well, no, I won't go into it because it is still a live case.
The absurd thing is he's actually a really good bloke, spent most of his life helping other people. Because he's been unemployed, he hasn't had, he's ended up putting most other people first in his life and spent a lot of time helping them on all sorts of things within his health capacity. Done a lot of volunteering work, helped with the local Almond Blossom Festival back at home, organised a lot of stuff with that, and always been trying to give back to the community, which is the way we were brought up. We had, all my grandparents were all small business owners or farmers, which is essentially the same thing, and always tried to give back to the community. And that's the way we've just been brought up to be, that's the way we've always tried to approach life.
Well, having had a lot to do with both you and Paul, I suppose, over the last 12 months, I can attest to the fact that you two are wonderful gentlemen. You're good guys, and you are being treated, particularly Paul, extremely badly, and because of the nature of the situation, that places pressure on everybody around him. And I think
it's nearly
Michael,
destroyed my partner and mine's relationship, and nearly, it's his mental health wasn't great beforehand with all the injuries and problems he's had, and brain injuries and all that, and that sure as heck hasn't made that any better.
No,
But,
no.
Yeah.
And yes, you and your partner have taken, well, you've done what family do, and it's all
pull
anybody
together
can ask
against the odds, really.
Yeah. And it's important that that we support him, folks. It's important that we support Paul. If you haven't met Paul yet, you will at one stage. He'll be on my show, or he'll be on somebody else's, or with a bit of luck, he'll turn up at one of our events. And as he did in Frankston there last November or October when we were down there. So I think if you've got a few bucks you can spare, folks, that Fundly address that's on the screen right now. You're not looking for $100,000. You've spoken to barristers who believe.
Well, if we went barristers and lawyers, it's probably upper. We've been told around 100,000. If we go through a lawyer that's considering doing something, it's probably around 40 or 50 or something like that. But as with everything, that always ends up being a little bit more complex, usually in the long run, than it's supposed to be at the outset. So on the Fundly, there's some funds showing as being donated, which has most gratefully been received and much appreciated, and it's only gone towards legal costs. But the reality is those are costs that have already accrued, and he still can't pay the balance of the costs from the first lawyers. Still owes them quite a substantial amount of money, even with them having been quite flexible and tried to reduce that as much as they can.
A lot of people in the chat are asking about the promise the Aussie Cossack made to you about helping fund through all of this. A lot of people are asking whether or not he's been helping or is in the background helping or doing anything like that. Can you give us any kind of an update there?
I mean, yes, he was quite generous right in the first week or so, and that was much appreciated. Helped with his first couple of weeks of legals, which was great. Helped him get out on bail, so that was also great. Obviously, since then, looks like the Cossack's been in a lot more difficulty than most people, and that's there's obviously no magic pot of gold coming from any direction at the moment, and hasn't been from that direction for a long time. But it's not saying that what he was able to do wasn't appreciated, because it certainly was.
It's just I guess this is an ongoing matter, and it's got a lot more serious than what it initially started out as. So we need to get this figured out. We need to get Paul's truck back to him. To be honest, I'm quite worried of the damage that it would cause him to lose the truck. I think it would be a devastating thing to him emotionally and mentally. Is that off base?
Yeah, well, obviously, of course, it's going to have an effect when you put every single cent you've owned, including the bit of money that he got out of his 10-year legal battle for his injuries, which was not enough to support the average household for even 12 months. He put that into buying and selling some vehicles and a few things until he could build it up into something that actually enabled him to buy this vehicle. I mean, this vehicle is a replacement value is around $215,000 odd to get it rebuilt.
Yeah, wow.
It's the only one in the country, right?
Yeah.
So it's not something you can, and that's the issue with the movie production. They can't just go anywhere and get an even higher one, or turn around and say, "Oh, we'll give you 10 grand to use it for a week." Like, it just isn't within the realms of possibility. So when he's put every single cent that he's owned into it for so long, of course it's going to have an effect. But that said, I guess ultimately he feels that he was not guilty on pretty much all accounts of what he's been charged with, and
Yep.
he feels like he, the ultimate goal would be to get through court and hopefully find that a jury or judge decided the same. But,
yeah. All right. Well, look, I think if people can help, I think somebody put a question in the chat or a statement in the chat. $1 from everybody who went to Canberra last year.
Oh,
$1.
You'd be home and hosed.
Yep. So if you were in Canberra last year and can spare $1, go to that fundly.com site.
And if people can share it with their friends, that would be appreciated too, because he's got a bit of a timeline as well, really. The time frame we've sort of got is really only a few weeks to be able to know whether we can actually get somewhere with this as well.
There is a certain clock ticking in the background, I guess, is the best way to describe that. So, if anybody can help, then $1. If you were in Canberra last year and you can spare $1, please put it into that fundly.com site, help-freedom-truck, or you can go to the Facebook site too, which is facebook.com/help-freedom-truck, and you'll be able to get some links there too. Michael,
as an aside with the truck, I just thought I should mention this actually. When we're talking about how he funded it, obviously a $200,000 truck takes a fair bit of money. The initial actual purchase of it was actually paid for. It was a loan from my parents, or from our parents, and that came entirely out of their mortgage.
Yeah, right.
So it's not, which is the absurd thing. Technically, you wouldn't think that they could actually confiscate something that is partly, or in that case, almost primarily owned by other people. That's just ludicrous. But that's how they seem to proceed with it. They constantly refuse to accept that. They keep trying to refuse to accept that there's even a movie production that's being affected by it. They've got all the evidence of that. The last response I got from one of the clowns down there, senior clown that is, was that they don't open YouTube. YouTube? No, they don't open. It was just generally they don't open links from emails, so they couldn't look at the. They couldn't look at the video of the scenes cut together with the scenes of the truck in the movie that showed that it is actually a legitimate $500,000 movie.
Wow. That's beyond pathetic. Beyond pathetic. And all I can say is the people are coming. The people are coming. And they will not stand for this bullshit. If you are working in that area and you are propagating this bullshit, we are coming for you. There's nothing you can do about it. You'll get away with it for a little while, and you'll hurt people, good people like Paul, for a little while. But we will
just wake up and realize you're not doing an honest day's work when you're targeting and attacking good, hard-working Australians. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time tonight. Michael, please pass on our best to Paul, and I hope we can get a few bucks in the bank tonight for you to help push that legal case forward. I know I'll do whatever I can. If you want to do a fundraiser or something down there and you need a host or whatever, I'm happy to come down and do something like that for you. I think between John Wilson and myself, we might be able to find a couple of special things that we could potentially auction off. So maybe that's something we can look at doing in the near future before I've got to shoot off again. And we can raise a few bucks that way. Maybe even do it online. Why should people miss out online for an online auction? We'll find some interesting stuff, and every little bit will go to help fund the legal defence for Paul. It's important to everybody that we get Paul's truck back. It's important to the movement. It's important to Paul, but it's important to Australia generally. They were worried that the Freedom Truck was going to become some kind of homage image for the freedom movement. a deity, if you like, of the freedom movement. Well, they're the ones that are going to create it. Give the bloody truck back, and you won't have that problem. But they are going to make this into an issue where the people will not forget about that truck. And God help the AFP officer that thinks he's going to own it by the end of this, because that's not going to work either. So, all right, mate. Thank you very much, and pass on the best to Paul.
All right, and
all right.
Thanks also to Bruce for joining in the conversation and sharing his story too. Because
absolutely, Bruce.
A bit of an eye opener.
Important. Yeah, absolutely, and it's good that it's really good that we've got runs on the board as a win. I know there are probably a few losses on the board as well, but not in this regard. And having seen the evidence, and I've seen the police evidence as well, there's not a hope in hell that Paul will get convicted in the Supreme Court. Not in front of a jury of his peers. Not a hope in hell. But the cost of getting to that and getting him out of it is not insignificant. So if you can help, folks, fundly.com is the place to be. And fundly.com/help-freedom-truck. And if you were in Canberra last year and can afford $1, please dump that $1 in there, and the boys will be able to afford the best legal representation. And we'll have that truck back, and kids will be able to enjoy it in the movie, hopefully in the next couple of years by the time it's been shot and fixed up. Thanks, Michael, and thank you, Bruce. Thank you again for your service, mate. You're a very brave man. I'm not sure whether or not people are completely aware that you resigned your Air Force commission over the jab, and the fact that you wouldn't push it. You're a principled, strong man, and thank you very much for being part of this movement and for leading by example. It's a very brave example all the same, but thank you very much for your service, and thank you for leading like you have.
I had to.
That's right. It's all we've all got to do. We've all got to do it. But the proof in the pudding is that you can get up and do it. So, yeah. All right, guys, thank you very much. I'll catch up with you all again in the not too distant future, and hopefully have some good news, Michael, on what's going on with Paul. That'd be great.
Yeah, people that are donating to the Fundly, if they have a look at the different fund amounts, some of them include, the bigger amounts include a ride in the truck, and the bigger, again, amounts include a day of chauffeuring in the truck and things like that.
Oh, wow.
Assuming we can get it all back. So
Yeah, great. Oh, excellent. Yeah. All right, well, there you go. There's a fun birthday party for the kids and maybe a couple of adults as well.
Yeah.
All right, guys, thanks very much, and I'll talk to you again real soon.
Thanks,
Cheers, Carl. Cheers, Michael.
Good on you guys. Well, hell of a show. Hey, a lot of interesting news out of that regarding the way that the AFP are working, and problematic is probably one way of describing that. I want you to remember, folks, that doing what Bruce did is important. Standing up. Doing what Paul has done is important. Stand up. There is a lady who lives north of where I am. I received an email a couple of weeks ago. She's in her 80s and had a fall and damaged her collarbone. She was going off to go and have a scan done of the collarbone to see whether or not it was broken or whatever. And driving to the scan place, she's driven underneath one of those seatbelt cameras where it's taken a photo of her with her seatbelt under her arm rather than across her, potentially broken collarbone. $440, 5 points or 4 points, I think it was. And this lady had never been in trouble in any way, shape or form, never had any kind of fine put against her for driving or anything at all, and was mortified that this sort of thing was going to happen, and that, given she had a very good reason in that she was on her way to have a scan for the damage to her collarbone, she had a very good reason, but she was worried about what they were going to do. She couldn't afford the $440. And I got an email from her next door neighbours who asked whether or not we could give them any advice. So the only advice I gave was tell her to walk into the court, fight it, say not guilty, and where is my jury? You see, in the magistrate's court, folks, if you've been charged and you have to front the magistrate's court, they will have you believe that you can only stand in front of a magistrate, be heard in front of a magistrate, be judged by that magistrate. It is bullshit. Bullshit. You are entitled to a jury of your peers. So, if you've got an unjust speeding fine, don't pay it. go to court and walk into the court and ask the judge where your jury is. You're prepared to fight this, but you're only going to do it in a jury trial. They'll tell you can't have one. Tell them it's bullshit. The law hasn't been changed that much. They've obfuscated this a lot, but you tell them you want a jury, and there's nothing they can do. They have to give you a jury, or, as happily happened in this lady's case, they throw the case out. So nothing happened to her. All because at 81 or 83 years of age, she was brave enough to walk into the court and say, "Not guilty, Your Honour, and I want a trial by jury." Or a jury trial, not a trial by jury. And of course, that's a huge expense we're going to go to for this sort of a thing. Oh, well, I don't care. You're the ones that dragged me in here. That's how you have to view this. You're the ones that gave me this piece of paper that accuses me of doing something illegal. I'm saying I didn't do it illegally, or I've done nothing illegal. There was no intent. There was no harm caused. There was no damage. This is just robbery under a different name. So if you have a magistrate's court charge you're facing and you want to fight that charge, walk in and ask for a jury trial. Let's see how good their evidence really is versus yours. I mean, you're going to have to stand up and tell the jury your side of the story, and the jury is going to have to believe you to win. Therefore, it's much easier to tell the truth. And you will find that the low-level prosecutors in places like the Magistrates Court aren't up for this. Most of them have only been out of legal or law school. If they've actually been to law school, most police prosecutors haven't. They've just done a police prosecution course, which is totally different. They wouldn't know how to deal with a trial by jury or a jury trial. So if that's what you're going to do, if you are having issues in your life with the Magistrates Court issue, by all means, fight it. But do not let the magistrate be the judge, jury, and executioner of you. Courts have juries for a reason. You have a right to be heard in front of 12 good men and women, your peers, the people from the area in which you live. They have a right to hear your story, your truth, and then look at the prosecutorial evidence and see if it matches up. And I can tell you that the last thing the magistrates' courts or the judiciary want is a whole bunch of jury trials in the magistrates' court where every jury that walks out after giving or upholding a not guilty verdict knows of the corruption and bullshit that the prosecution are trying to push through the courts. Because that's what will happen. You get 12 people sitting on that jury, they're going to see the bullshit that the Department of Public Prosecutions are going to try and push on you. So that's going to create bad juju. Everybody's going to learn the secret. And while you may not always win under a jury trial, particularly if you've done something that is wrong, if you've done nothing that is wrong, if you've hurt no one, if you've damaged nothing, if there is no loss, you've committed no fraud, you will walk away not guilty, free. Because the good people that judge you will judge you on that. They won't legal you like your own lawyer will, or the prosecutor, or worse still, the magistrate. They will just railroad you. As you heard me say there before, when I was in Canberra with Paul, the letter that Paul received from Legal Aid, the first line of which is, "My first obligation is to the court." That is bullshit. If you're putting a lawyer on, the first obligation is to you. That's where their first obligation should be. Now, okay, just because you can't afford to pay for a lawyer and you're getting legal aid, does that mean you should give up the freedom? That kind of representation? Of course it doesn't. But it is interesting that the legal aid system proclaims that its first duty is to the court. That indicates that you are always going to be agreeing to plead guilty to something, because the first duty of the court is to get guilty verdict and maybe level a fine against you, get money out of you, some punitive damages of some kind. So be aware and don't play that game. Don't walk in and be judged by your magistrate. Walk in and demand a jury trial. It is your right to have a jury trial. That would be my best advice that I could offer you. I just need to. Oh yeah, Paul's probably got a good thing there. The legal bullshit. You're absolutely right. You need wings to stay above it. Yes. Do not delve into the cesspit of legal bullshit at the moment, unless you are dragged into it, because it is not good. All corrupt. And all corrupt law will be thrown out under the new quantum system. Yes, I believe that will be the case, and those people who enacted those laws will also maybe have a few issues with that too. I'm going to wrap up the show real quick, but there were a couple of things, folks, that I did want to touch on tonight. Some of them are probably a little bigger than others, but I think the thing that I won't. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I will do one of the topics I was going to touch on tonight, because this one makes me sick. Tim Tams. Arnott's are putting crushed cochineal bugs in our fucking Tim Tams. If you have a packet of Tim Tams in your fridge right now, go and have a look at the ingredients. And if you see something that says cochineal, cochineal, go and Google what a cochineal bug is. Lots of protein. That'll be nice. But that's happening in our Tim Tams right now. Arnott's. Where did they start? Morpeth in New South Wales, not far out of Maitland. Now, I don't know, they're probably owned by some international conglomerate these days. I doubt they're a family-owned Australian company anymore, but the bastards are putting bugs in your chocolate biscuits. They've just destroyed Tim Tams. For me, anyway. For the rest of my bloody life. Just destroyed them. So I think we should be writing to Arnott's, folks. And I think we should be sharing this news far and wide. All right? Tell everybody you know. Tim Tams, the Australian favourite, are full of bugs. Crushed up cochineal bugs. What other biscuits? Probably bloody all of them. Are getting the bug treatment. I know there's a lot of chips. I know there's a lot of corn-type chip things that are coming out with a lot of bugs in them at the moment. But Tim Tams. Fuck. Tim Tams. Bloody hell. And finally, have a look at this. What do you reckon that is? I'll tell you what that is. That's taken from a plane flying above Ohio the day of the Ohio train derailment and the vinyl chloride fire. That looks like about the most horrible, dark, poisonous, deadly thing I've ever seen in the sky. So people who are not aware yet of what's going on in Ohio is going to become practically unlivable, particularly anywhere for a couple of 100 miles around East Palestine, where this planned action happened. This absolute mass genocidal event was planned and enacted. The people who set fire to that vinyl chloride should be electrocuted in a depowered electric chair, so it takes them some time to die. That is absolutely horrendous. Animals. 500 miles away from Ohio, birds are falling from the sky, dead, flying through the residue that has been left. Acid rain, hydrochloric acid is falling from the sky in parts of America where they've been drastically affected by this cloud. Why vinyl chloride isn't hydrochloric acid? Well, no, but when you set it on fire, it changes into something else called polyvinyl chloride, which floats up in the air. Then, if water gets in touch with polyvinyl chloride, it turns into hydrochloric acid. Physics, it's a wonderful thing. Or chemistry is a wonderful thing. The physics plays a large role of it too. The physics of the wind, that's how they're spreading it. This is killing large portions of America's food bowl. And it is killing animals. It is killing animals on the ground and in the air. It is killing crops. It is poisoning the soil. It is poisoning the water. There are mass fish kills popping up in rivers all through Ohio and further south in America. We're just waiting for it to happen here. Because something like that's bound to happen here. They need these sorts of events to happen all over the world, folks, so that we can, well, maybe we can survive it if we keep our eyes open. But they are making a great effort to kill us on multiple levels, and starvation is going to be just one of them. Before we go, I will share with you one little video that I have left for tonight. You think this is the one I want to share? Yeah, this is the one I want to share. This, I hope, will give you a little bit of hope that in the future, life, the universe, and everything is going to get a little bit better.
So the video you see on the screen right now, it's from the 1950s. People speak about anti-gravity. It's not anti-gravity. It's electromagnetic levitation. And it's the type of technology that they had in the Second World War. And of course, way before in the 19th and 18th and 17th centuries. It's what we wrongly understand as Tartaria or Tartary. It's not that. It's beyond that. It's more than that. But for the sake of understanding, the reset of humanity and what happened to the previous civilization that built the Americas and Europe and what we call today Russia and Siberia. So yeah, this is kind of like everything is electromagnetism. Everything is like extracting the energy from the ether, which was forbidden. And at the beginning of the 20th century, it was forbidden specifically by law to be able to use free energy and to extract the energy from the ether, etc. So yeah, there you go. It's just for your own knowledge.
Wow. So there you go. Wait until I start showing you pictures of the trains they were using. It's all coming up. You can be guaranteed it doesn't matter whether you're on the road or floating in the air, folks. There is always bound to be some dickheads sitting there. And what am I doing there? I'm playing something I shouldn't be. Can't even see where it's coming from. Let me pause that. There you go. Sorry. So yes, it doesn't matter whether you're flying in the air or you're driving on the ground. It doesn't really matter. Wherever you're going to be, there is going to be dickheads somewhere. Let's hope that if it's in an electromagnetic levitation vehicle, it comes with a parachute.
You let one ant stand up to us, then they all might stand up. Those puny little ants outnumber us 100 to 1. And if they ever figure that out, there goes our way of life. It's not about food. It's about keeping those ants in line. That's why we're going back. Does anybody else want to stay? Let's ride!